I'm sure I don't know what you mean. Okay. All right. So the black point on this particular TV is not what it should be for documentation, which is fine because I don't ever really use documents. But this one over here, the black point's perfect. How are those two in the back there? Okay-ish?
That one looks fine from here.
Yeah? Can you read it from there?
I can't read it. I'm not that good.
Okay. The black point on that one I can't read either, so I'm going to read off my screen. I've got copies of the book. Who needs a book? Going once. Right here? You forgot yours? That's not you need a book. That's you forgot a book. I need one, yeah. What you gonna do this time?
I will return it.
I don't want it back. Yeah, you're welcome. Douglas, you got yours? All right. Anyone want a digital copy real quick? Did it last week for those? Like 7 people? Hey, they're all gone. Okay. Becca, you got yours? Your It's on your phone? Okay. Counts. Half credit. Okay, so we're talking about the 12 apostles and where they went after the book of Acts was basically over, according to someone who lived 200 years after it was done. I mean, better than 1,000, 1,500 years later, but it's still, you're talking about legends for some of them, and then like pointing to someone who lived one generation closer for others. So Eusebius was the guy who was the first real church historian after the apostle or the disciple Luke. And then from that came a tradition of historians who would continue that mission. So we talked about his book in some detail. There's a whole introduction. Got your books? Hey, there it is. And so what the author Eusebius was all about, what his thoughts were, what his motivations might have been, who paid him, for example, is a pretty big one. Who's the guy that paid him as a patron for his work? Who's the guy who commissioned the ecclesiastical history book to be written in the first place? Constantine, the Emperor Constantine, the one who, through this or in this conquer, right? Remember all that? Okay, maybe not, but that's what we're doing. Okay, so John, the son of Zebedee, right? We talked about him. Did we finish John? We did? Sort of, kind of? Okay, he was the first one to die of old age, or the only one to die of old age, as far as we know, right? So he was in exile on the Isle of Patmos out there in the Mediterranean, and then a year or two maybe, and then he was pulled from exile, allowed to leave Patmos. He went back to Ephesus, where no doubt he died. If you have a copy, okay. I should know my audience by now, okay? If anyone has a copy of Ecclesiastical Histories by Eusebius, does anyone have a copy of that book in their library? George? My only chance, right there. If you happen to look online and find a copy of it in the English language, or you want to get a copy because you love this stuff, there's a lot of stories about what Old Man John did after the Isle of Patmos incident, okay? And they're interesting because they were kind of like motivational stories. They're preacher stories, okay? The preacher stories about what John did as kind of like setting up the next generation of preachers to kind of do what John did. Real quick, there was one story that got passed down. It was written after a while that when he was an old man, he was almost blind. He had a walking stick, so he'd use that to get around. He was in Ephesus, and he had a young guy who was like a sailor by trade. He converted him. So he had a new convert. And the phrase new convert was used there, interestingly. And then he didn't see him for a while, and so he was not coming to church when they have their assemblies. And then so John, as an old man who's almost blind, walked down to the part of town that a good Christian wouldn't go down. Everybody with me on that one? Okay. He went down that place in Ephesus and found the guy who was drunk and who was gambling. And when John saw him, the guy broke down in tears and fell on his face and tried to apologize to the Apostle John, because John was an old man who couldn't get around, could hardly see, and he went all the way down to where this guy was, and then he repented and came back to church. So that's kind of like, it's a preacher story, kind of, but from John. So that's the Apostle John. Okay, any thoughts about John?
Just one comment.
Sure.
Ephesus is a hilly city.
Yeah.
The fort is at the lowest part, so he literally would have had to go down to find this guy. And then back up.
And then back up. So, no radios crackling? Great. Good. You hear a boom and you look for the guys that have radios. Are they crackling? Are y'all moving? Okay, we're not. We're good. Keep going. Todd, last week, after class, he's like, Todd Van Etten, for those who don't know. Todd said, so you mean to tell me you've got James, the first martyr, after Stephen, and then you've got John as the one who stayed around the longest. It's kind of like a bookend. I'm like, yeah, I've never thought about that before, but these two guys, Sons of Thunder, you got the first one as the first apostle that was martyred, and then you've got John living until the Lord came back, quote unquote. Okay, next, Philip. Well, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Why does it get tricky on Philip? Extra credit. Anyone besides George? Too many Philips. Yeah, because there's two of them, right? You got the Apostle Philip, and then you've got the Philip who's like a preacher who goes to Samaria, right? His daughters are prophets, that kind of prophetesses, right? There you go. All right, let's go to scriptural connections here to get some context for who this guy is. John 1:43 through 46. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee, as he does. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now, Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. So he grew up around Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." I mean, okay. He nailed it, but it's just kind of funny to read it that way because by the time that this was written by the Apostle John, this was kind of like one of those things that was well known. So he just kind of wrote it officially. Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" And Philip said to him, "Come and see." So this is the line. I mean, nobody good comes from that place. Are you sure? He's like, "Hey, come check it out. Come and see. That's the one," right? I got a sermon I do sometimes whenever I feel like it, and he goes, "It's come and see." Guess how many times the phrase "come and see" is used in the New Testament? It's a sermon, so 3. That's it, right? Whenever you find a phrase 3 times, it's automatically a sermon. You just got to write it. You don't have a choice, right? That's how it works. Okay. And then also in John 14:8 and 9, Philip said to him, "Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for us." Well, you don't say. I mean, the God of heaven and earth that no man has ever seen, besides Moses seeing his backside by being hid in the cleft. Yeah, that's enough, Jesus. And Jesus said, "Have I been with you so long, and you still don't know me, Philip?" Interesting turn of phrase. "Whoever has seen me has seen the Father." Well, what does he mean by that? how can you say, show us the Father? And so Philip didn't have a whole lot. I mean, he's not the Peter of the New Testament, right? Not a whole lot of text that deals with him specifically, but he is mentioned here by John twice. Okay, so what happened to Philip? Well, here's the condensed version, paraphrase from his book. It is said that Philip, one of the 12 apostles, was buried at Hierapolis with his daughters who lived in chastity and prophesied. 2 of them remained virgins until their death, but another lived in the Holy Spirit, having also been buried at Ephesus. And then he cites a source here. This was related by Papias, who heard it from the daughters of Philip, and by Polycrates of Ephesus. Okay. What do you think about that particular quotation of what happened to the apostle Philip? Sounds like the other guy, right? And what makes you say that?
The daughters.
The daughters who are prophetesses, right? So if you remember, when Paul was coming back from his 3rd missionary journey, he stopped by the place where Philip was and stayed with them for like a night. And the daughters, through the instruction of the Holy Spirit, bound themselves with ropes and used that as an illustration and said, Paul, if you go back to Jerusalem, this will be your fate. And he's like, gotcha. So he goes back to Jerusalem to have that done, right? So it's interesting here, though, the actual quotation from Eusebius mentions that Philip, one of the 12 apostles. So he's saying we're talking about the Philip from the Gospels, not the Philip of Acts. But all the evidence here talking about the prophets that were his daughters, seems like it's talking about Philip in the Gospels, not the book of Acts. Right? So it's kind of the idea of, well, is the Philip in the book of Acts the Philip in the Gospels? No, because it's really, really clear when you read the book of Acts, we're not talking about one of the 12. Yeah, he's one of the 7, one of the deacons, if you will, that were set up to help the tables in Jerusalem. So he's not one of the 12 because they weren't chosen for that. So that's a little confusing, right? So here's a summary. Eusebius draws on the writings of Papias and Polycrates to describe Philip's ministry in Hierapolis, a city in Phrygia. There he labored faithfully and was eventually buried alongside his prophetic daughters. His family devotion left a continuing legacy of faith, which is a phrase, for the local church. Eusebius is careful to distinguish this Philip from Philip the evangelist mentioned in Acts, knowing that they were both active in spreading the gospel. If you'll keep reading in church history, then you'll see that he mentions the other one, and it's almost the same exact story. So, George?
If he was indeed in Hierapolis, that put him within walking distance of both Laodicea and Colossae. So he could have had a lot of influence if that's where he was.
Good place for an apostle.
Say again?
That's a good place for an apostle.
Yes.
When you read Colossians, Paul had a hard time trying to convince them that Jesus actually walked in the flesh. And so if you've got an eyewitness of the resurrection apostle living there, that'd be a good place to have him, right? So that's a little confusing. But hold on to your hats because it gets even a little more murky a little bit later. Okay? Questions, comments about Philip? Okay, if not, moving on. Number 6, Bartholomew, good old Barty. Always forget, right? I don't know about you, but Bartholomew is never on my top of my head when I think about disciples or apostles. This is the one of which we have a bit more concrete extra-biblical accounts of where he actually went, because it's not like he went somewhere in Asia Minor or modern-day Turkey. This is like, we know where he went because we have evidence from like 100 years after he was there that they had writings in their language about this Jesus of Nazareth. That's pretty cool to find. Okay, so here is the Bartholomew in the connection. If we look over in John chapter 1, is he mentioned here? Or did I have the wrong verse? Wrong one. Okay, anyway, he's in the list. So here is the quotation from Eusebius. Pantaenus, who was sent to India, is said to have found that before his arrival, the gospel according to Matthew had already reached them, for there were some among them who had known Christ. So this is a new guy, the first guy that's mentioned there, Pantaenus. He was sent like 100 years after the first century, so second century, was sent to India to go bring them the gospel. And when this guy got there, he found a copy of the Gospel of Matthew. Well, how'd that get there? Somebody brought it, right? There was no UPS back in the day, no FedEx, right? No USPS, if you want to get there in 15, 16 days, right? So you have the Gospel of Matthew being found in India by a person who was sent there to convert them. And there were already Christians there. That's weird. He discovered that Bartholomew, one of the apostles, had preached to them and left them the writing of Matthew in Hebrew letters, which they preserved until his own time. Interesting. So they've already gone to a place to try to bring them the gospel, and they find a copy of Matthew, of all things. Pretty good find, right? In Hebrew. So someone who spoke Hebrew brought it with him, or he made it there. So Bartholomew apparently went to India. That's what the legend says. There was evidence found for that 100 years later. Interesting. Questions about that one? There's an interesting kind of irony, obviously, that the people that he would have found in India were Indians, and they were Hindus more than likely at that time. And so having that particular religion of many gods, and then you've got a guy showing up who was a disciple, follower, apostle of Jesus Christ, going there would be a different dynamic than it would be today, I would imagine. Mary?
You might have covered this already, but how reliable is this history?
Okay. It depends on what you mean reliable. Okay. Is it gospel truth? No. I mean, nothing is gospel truth except for the gospel, right? Did he have any particular political or religious motivations to make this stuff up? I would say no. Other people would say yes, because he was paid by Constantine and therefore he's evil. I mean, that's what some people say. I don't think so. He did a very, very good job in his 10 books, always saying what he knows to be the case and then giving evidence for it. And if there's no written evidence for it, he'll say, we have been told. And that's your cue. He will say, when I say we have been told, this is just what I heard. So it's not truth, it's just the hearsay from generations ago. So is it true? Sure.
The original writings of this guy, or is this all copy?
Of Pantaenus or Eusebius?
Either or.
Okay, Pantaenus, no, we don't have anything from him. The only thing we have from him is what Eusebius says about him. Do we have any copies of Eusebius? We don't have it in the original Greek or Latin, but we do have our old copies of it. We have 3 old copies of it, and they all agree with themselves about what they said, which is tricky. So when I say we have 6,000 fragments of the New Testament, is that good or bad? 6,000? I mean, we're talking about things. How many copies of the Iliad do we have? 2. We have 2. Okay? Here's another interesting thing. How many copies of Romeo and Juliet do we have from Shakespeare?
I would say the original is gone.
We have two. We have two that are in Middle English, right? Okay. You have Romeo and Juliet V1, Romeo and Juliet V2. And V2 has a lot of additions to it. So if we have two Iliads in Greek, and then we've got two in Middle English Romeo and Juliet, and then we've got 6,000 fragments of the New Testament. I mean, is it good or bad that we have 6,000? It depends.
It's very good, especially when they collaborate with each other.
Yeah, so you've got 6,000 either entire codices, or you've got pages, or you've got just books, or you've got fragments, and you can determine which fragment it was based on what's there, right? So you got 6,000 versions and copies of the New Testament, which is just unheard of in documentation from this time period. Unheard of, right? That's why, by the way, finding the Hebrew Bible in the Dead Sea Scrolls was such a big deal. Is because the copies of the Masoretic text that we have in the King James Version, for example, you know when that was done? 1000 AD. They're Middle Ages, right? So you find copies of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they dated to 200 years before Jesus. And then you compare them, and guess what you find? Exact same character for character, word for word. So it's 1,000 years they nailed it. And then you've got 6,000 fragments of the New Testament. And so I say all of that to say, when you're looking at anything else, it's never going to compare to the New Testament. I mean, that is the pinnacle of transmission of ancient documents. So Eusebius, yeah, we don't have it. We don't have the original, the autograph. We don't have that. What we've got is 200 years later, someone translated it from that to Latin, and the Latin version that we got 1.5 of those, and they line up. Okay? Okay?
But it said that he found people there who had known Christ.
Yep.
And it talks about finding Matthew. When he's saying known Christ, was that a personal knowledge of Christ, of meeting him, or were these Christians?
We found some that had known Christ in the sense that they were calling themselves Christians. There were Christian communities where they went in India. So not that they had known Jesus. They would have known from the report of the eyewitness Bartholomew who Jesus was. That's what he meant. Yep.
Time frame was where Bartholomew went to India.
Yeah, after the book of Acts.
So the original Gospels were written in Greek, and the copy that they had was in Hebrew.
Okay.
Matthew wrote his Gospel sometime between 50 and 60 AD. So
Sure.
if he wrote in 50 and 60 AD, and if Bartholomew went to India before that time frame,
Yeah. So here's the thing about that timeline. First of all, we don't have of when they went to India or when he went to India. Nor do we have a solid date on when Matthew was written. Nor do we have a solid piece of evidence that it was originally written in Greek or Hebrew, because we don't have the autograph. And so more than likely what happened is you've got Matthew. If you look at the text of Matthew, it seems like his audience were Jewish. I say that because when you read Matthew in comparison to Mark or Luke or John, for example, it's almost like he's writing it and never explaining any Jewish customs or laws or scriptures at all. He just puts it in there. Now, the readings of the Old Testament we have in Matthew do line up with the Septuagint, which was the Greek version. So he was using that to quote. And so whether or not Matthew was written in Hebrew or in Greek originally is unclear. Was it transmitted primarily in Greek after its original composition? Yes. We have a ton of copies of Matthew, and they're all in Greek, and they all line up, to a certain degree. We've never found a Hebrew copy of the Gospel of Matthew, for example. So we have a lot of questions and not a whole lot of evidence to say what actually took place. It would be interesting, though, of why this would not be true. Why would they make up a story that we have this evangelist going to India, and then he lies about finding Christians in a copy of Matthew in Hebrew? Why would he lie about that? I don't know. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Next. Speaking of, good old Matt is up here. Let's see who Matthew is, in case you don't know. Matthew chapter 9, verses 9 through 13. In the copy of the book that bears his name, this is what this guy says about himself. He doesn't do the whole John thing about the one that Jesus loved the best, the fastest guy in the world, right? That's not John, this is Matthew. As Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at a tax booth. Well, you wouldn't sit there unless you worked there. I'll tell you that first and foremost. This is like the enemy place, right? If you're working for the IRS, for an occupying nation, and you're Jewish, you don't want to sit there. He said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. And as Jesus reclined at table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when he heard it, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician or a doctor, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. For I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." I mean, boom, right? It's Jesus for you. You got the religious people like, why is he over there? It's like, how about you go read your Bible again and tell me what it means? I desire mercy, not sacrifice. That's Matthew. And then here's Matthew 28, right? Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you, and behold, I am with you always, even to the end of the world or the age. Right? That's the Great Commission that we often talk about. So here is what the book says. Matthew, having first proclaimed the gospel to the Hebrews, meaning the Jewish people, when he was about to go to other nations, committed his gospel to writing in his native tongue, so that by his writing he might supply the want of his presence to those whom he was leaving. And thus it is said that he wrote the gospel according to Matthew in Hebrew letters. So what's the key phrase in that last sentence? That's the one. So he's not giving you evidence here besides hearsay, oral tradition, gossip, if you will. Matthew was about to leave where he was, and instead of just leaving them empty-handed, he's like, you know what? Let me just write down what happened with me and Jesus. And he wrote what we call the gospel according to Matthew. And it said it was done first in Hebrew. All the copies that we found, not in Hebrew. Never found a Hebrew one, we found the Greek one. So either he wrote it in Hebrew and the autograph was lost after translated into Koine Greek, or that's not right, because the oral tradition of him writing in Hebrew was just kind of nice, but it really was written in Greek. Either way, Matthew was qualified to actually write this because he had an education and he was good with numbers. And he was probably not autistic like The Chosen shows you if you've watched that program. Jim Kerr. Okay. Questions about that one? Okay, here's what the summary of all the text about Matthew in Eusebius says. Eusebius tells us that Matthew was first preached among the Jews, which would make sense if you were a tax collector, you'd want to go to those people first. And then departing for distant nations. He wrote his gospel in the Hebrew or Aramaic language so that his people could continue to read his teaching after he left. Later traditions, which Eusebius mentions indirectly, so you'll find quotations from Eusebius and you can tell where they're from. He doesn't cite that because they were so well known you wouldn't cite that in his day. Say Matthew went on to preach in Ethiopia. His written gospel served as a lasting witness or evidence of Christ's teaching and fulfilled his role as both preacher and recorder of the good news. There you go. Grain of salt, right? Okay, questions, comments? Okay. Thomas. All right, there's a guy I knew one time named John, and he was deaf. So I learned sign language from John. Could we go to the gym every day, and I learned my alphabet, and then I had an iPad I could like write on real quick and be like, what's this word? He showed me the sign, and he would show me the sign while he's holding his shaker bottle with pre-workout or protein or water in this hand, and show me the sign one-handed, which if you know sign language is not how really any signs are done. They're all done two-handed. So I learned one-handed lazy sign language from John at the gym. And so, I mean, it wasn't even Southern. It was just like, I'm too lazy to show you the real sign, so here it is, right? And so, anyway, I say Thomas because whenever... In the bathroom? Oh, no, you better not. The bathroom. All right. Whatever he would do, so he's deaf. Made that clear, right? And so whenever he would sign, he would never move his mouth when he's with me because he's teaching me sign language. And I didn't know he could read lips that well until like a year later. I'm like, you can read my lips? He's like, yeah. I'm like, John. He's like, well, you wanted to learn. I was like, no, I mean, not that bad. I mean, come on now. And that was his love. And so I was like, he would always sign. And then after a while, he would use his mouth to kind of also say it while he's doing it. And I go, what kind of food do you want after we go for lunch? And he was like, he would sign it, I want Thai food, and spell it Thai out, right? Thai food. And then I'm like, all right. And when I saw his mouth move, and it was always TH, and I was like, what do you want? And he was like, I want Thai food. I was like, what? Like, Thai food. I was like, Thai, T-I-E is how you say it. And he was like, I don't know, I'm deaf. I'm like, I know this, okay? I get in your car and you're blaring music and you can't hear it, but you love to feel the bass. I get it, I understand. And so whenever we would talk about the disciples, he would go, Thomas, and just look right at me and just say Thomas every time you do it to get on my nerves. So that's John. Whenever I see Thomas, he's always in my brain as Thomas. Okay, here's who Thomas is. John 20:24. Now, Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. Okay, John, I know you're an old guy. I know all your other friends are gone. But please go into more detail. Why is this guy called the twin? Did he just look like somebody else a lot? Was he an actual twin? Was this an inside joke? I don't know. So the other disciples told him, we have seen the Lord. So you know this guy is Thomas. What's his nickname in the church? Doubting Thomas. Poor dude. We'll meet him in heaven. And he's like, what'd you guys call me? Doubting? You weren't there, man. Okay. We've seen the Lord. He said, unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails and place my finger into the mark of the nails and place my hand into his side, I mean, okay. I will never believe. He's looking for evidence, I would suspect. That's the, benefit of the doubt for Thomas here. 8 days later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came, stood among them, and said, Charis. Surprise! Right? And he said to Thomas, hey, put your finger here. See my hands? Put your hand out and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe. How do you know that? Because he's Jesus. Okay, all right, here we go. Thomas answered him, my Lord and my God. Jesus said to him, have you believed because you've seen me? And then here is where you're in the Bible. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. Was it wrong for Thomas to doubt or ask for evidence? No. But Jesus acknowledges there's going to be a lot of people after you who don't get to see and feel Jesus, who will still believe. And they are in the better position. More blessed. Okay. Anyway, and then you got this guy in 9 chapters earlier. So Thomas, called the twin, again, don't know why, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. He said, I'm going to die. He's like, we'll go with you. I'm like, hey. Not everyone said that, just Thomas. He was interesting. Okay. The other verse that talks about him, unless I'm wrong, which I might be, isn't it, I go to prepare a place for you? Isn't that Thomas? And where I go, you know, and the way you know. And Thomas spoke and said, Lord, we don't know where we're going or how to get there. Isn't that Thomas?
Somebody named Thomas.
So, okay. All right. Yeah. That's the right answer. Okay, here we go. Eusebius. When the holy apostles were dispersed. Okay, so they were all in Jerusalem, right? Acts 8:4, I believe. Somebody look real quick. I believe it's Acts 8:4. There was persecution in the church in Jerusalem, and they were dispersed from there. So all the preachers left, all the Christians stayed, which is, of course, the preacher's joke, this is the only time in church history where you've had the preachers leave and the church stays, opposed to the preacher leaving. Okay, all right. Acts 8:4, I think. When the holy apostles were dispersed, it is said that Thomas was allotted Parthia as his field of labor. All right. George, help us.
Parthians formed the eastern border of the Roman Empire. The Romans never conquered the Parthians. In fact, there is a saying called the parting shot. It's because the Parthians would ride in on horses, fire arrows, and ride away. They wouldn't stand and fight when the Romans fought.
Well, yeah, if you're going to lose,
And
why
they
do
would
that?
turn in their saddle and fire behind them. It was the Parthian shot or the parting shot.
Cool.
But it would be Iran and probably what's now Pakistan or Eastern India at the time.
Okay. Real quick, we'll read this little paragraph and then we'll close out for the day. Where are we on? 8, home stretch. One more class and we'll be going on to Judges. Okay. According to Eusebius, citing Origen, who's like his grandfather in the faith, right? If you remember that from the introduction. Thomas carried the gospel eastward to Parthia, modern Iran, and surrounding areas. Later traditions known to Eusebius also place him in India, where he was eventually martyred. Thomas' story stands as a witness that even those who once doubted, come on, can spread bold proclaimers of the faith. Eusebius includes him among the great missionaries who spread Christianity far beyond the Roman world. So he's Iran and then probably went down with Bartholomew down to India, if that's true. Again, grain of salt. If this is all wrong, doesn't affect my salvation at all. But if you're curious about what happened and what kind of evidence do we have outside of Scripture to support the existence of Jesus and his apostles, it's a pretty good amount. If these guys did not exist, did not die for their faith, the story would have died out. There were 90 Jesus Messiah figures in the time of Jesus in the first century, and then they all died out. We've never heard of them, but this Jesus we have heard of because these guys died for him. Okay, we'll pause here for the morning. One more class. We'll go through the most confusing one, number 9, James, to begin class next week. If you're confused as to why James is so confusing, and you have the book, which you all should have, then just read through that and see where the confusion begins. Because James, the son of Alphaeus, and James, the just, seem to be different people. And we'll talk about that next week. Okay, thank you for your time and your attention. We'll be dismissed now for about 18 minutes before worship begins.